Welcome to What's in the Box, episodes of horror with Donna and Eric. I'm Donna,
And I'm Eric.
and we're talking about another movie that shaped our love of horror at a young age, and that movie is Creepshow. Um, I didn't realize that Joe Hill was in it,
Yep.
and when you had sent me the pictures, I was looking through because I thought you had mentioned it when we talked prior, and I totally spaced on it as I was watching it the other day. And then when I saw the picture, I'm like, holy crap, that was Joe Hill? Like, doesn't even look like Stephen King, which is funny because now he looks exactly like his father.
Yeah. Although, I don't know. Well, he probably does take after his mom more.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a fun little nugget of trivia, right? To have
Yeah.
both of them in there. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And he got a taste of it early on and stuff. So,
Yeah. So Creepshow, I guess would you call this an anthology movie?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's probably, and I was going to say, I mean, from what we've seen, it's probably the best anthology
Yeah.
movie. Beginning because all five of the stories are really good, and there's really not a weak one in the bunch,
Right.
which you don't normally get. There's almost always something that's really off.
Hmm.
If I was gonna, have to pick one that I thought was the weakest, it would probably be the Stephen King one, but the one he acts in. But
Yeah.
even it is really good. So it's not. So, I mean, this is a case where you're like, I'm comparing five really good things together. So this is the weakest of the five really good things. Instead of like when we talked about the Terrifier stuff, when we did, what is it, All Hallows Eve? Is that
Yeah.
the name? Yeah, the Aliens
The weakest of
was the
the,
weakest and
yeah.
really noticeably weak. Like
Yeah.
it stood out as not really part of the anthology and stuff. And I think that's like that with most anthology films. Although I guess we could probably get into an argument if we really dug down and looked at some of the 70s horror. There are quite a few there in the 70s that we might be able to say, oh, okay, this one holds up as well as Creepshow. But I don't know. I just think Creepshow itself is it's iconic. I mean, I think everybody that's a big fan of horror loves Creepshow.
Yeah. I liked how they kept the continuity of it being a comic book
Hmm.
throughout the segments, because when one would start, it would be like a comic book panel, and then when it would end, it would turn back into comic book panels.
Yeah, really smart how they
Yeah.
morphed it in and then allows them to do the opening sequence as an animated thing and not
Hmm.
stand out.
Yeah.
Because I know that they tried to do, they wanted, so the boy gets the comic taken away and the dad throws it away, and then the creeper or whatever we want to call it goes to the window and looks in on the boy, and then he flies away and we get kind of a view of the town or whatever. They wanted to do that with the creeper animatronic thing that they have outside the window, and they were going to pull it up with a crane, and it was going to end up being so expensive that it was
Hmm.
cheaper for them to animate. But because they had the other elements to animate, it makes sense. Otherwise, it would have stood out really. And you would have been like, what's going on here? This doesn't make any sense. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a perfect format too for an anthology film, the comic book,
Hmm.
and it's paying homage to what is it, EC Comics, the old comics that were banned
Yeah.
in the 50s and stuff. And so it's another callback, to pull in horror fans, especially probably older horror fans of that generation. And it has that House of Mystery feel from DC Comics and
Yeah.
um, what is it? Tales of Suspense? Was that what it was called?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's got that feel to it too, which was, the DC's version of the EC when they were able to put stuff out that had the comic codes on there. EC
Yeah.
Comics was a little more graphic, a little more gory. Um, and I think that's something Creepshow leans into.
Yeah. I actually just discovered a book. I haven't purchased it yet. It's called The 10 Cent Plague. and it's about the crusade against horror comics in the 50s.
Yeah, it's amazing the stuff that they latched onto in the 50s and 60s to try and vilify and to it's that classic in the 80s when they were trying to tell us heavy metal was
Satanic.
ruining
Yeah.
children. In the 50s, horror comics were ruining children, and so they came up with all the it's almost mirror image. So then you get the comic codes slapped on everything in the 50s, and then in the 80s, what did we get? We started getting the parental advisory sticker,
Yep.
just to calm everybody down, but it didn't change anything really.
Yeah.
In fact, it got to the point in the 80s where musicians wanted that because
Hmm.
it encouraged children and other fans to buy it because they
Yep.
wanted to get the thing that is taboo. And in the same way that it would, help with the comics, except for they in the 50s, they stopped publishing some of this stuff. And that,
Yeah.
there was no way to get it around the comic code, um, because we didn't really have comic shops until later where they could get around stuff like that if you wanted to. And they didn't really indie. There wasn't a huge indie um, comic underground scene. And there was a little bit of one, but the comic code and Marvel and DC pretty much controlled everything, at least
Yeah.
through this, through the 80s into the 90s. And maybe we start seeing a little bit more.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, but it was funny because watching this, I'm like, this is totally, you can tell that Romero was likely a fan of horror comics, because this is completely, and
mhm.
it just made me think of that book that I learned about. And I'm like, I really need to read that book now.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it sounds very interesting. And maybe we could do it as a thing. I'd love to read it too.
yeah,
Um, um, it's a perfect partnership though, because we got Stephen King that writes all the episodes, I guess, and then we have Romero directing it, and then Savini's the special effects. I mean, it's like three. It's like Cerebus of horror right there,
yeah, the
especially in the
trifecta.
early 80s. Because I mean, King was king in the early 80s, and he was
Hmm.
everything he did touched. Everything he touched turned to gold. So I mean, I think it's part of the reason why Creepshow is such an amazing thing, because there's all this opportunity for somebody's ego to get in the way, or for the production company to do something, or a producer to step in and do something stupid, and somehow they were able to bypass all of that and come up with this. um I mean, arguably it could be, you might be able to say this is a top 10 movie of the 80s, the entire 80s.
Yeah,
It's so well done. So
yeah. So this is the opening and ending cast, I'll say. Um, the dad who takes away Billy's comic book, and he's a little abusive because I believe he smacks Billy.
yeah, it had that vibe of the 80s where the dad comes in here screaming, do what I say,
Yeah,
don't talk back. The kid doesn't talk back. He just asks a question and gets smacked for it. But I mean, that's kind of the vibe of the, 70s and 80s. So,
yeah, yeah. And I was actually really surprised to see Tom Savini at the end.
yeah, no, and I thought they do a really good job as a garbage man. It's very well choreographed between the two of them, and
Yeah.
they obviously worked out some bits,
Hmm.
and it's a fun end cap. The two end caps, they're really well set up. The funny note is that Stan, the dad, he wanted to do the Stephen King. That's the character he wanted to do
Oh, he
when we
wanted to be
get to,
Geordie.
and he was told, well, Stephen King's doing that, so pick something else. And then I
Yeah.
guess he was kind of struggling with what to do. And then the guy's like, well, let me cast you as the dad, and we'll let you do the end caps or whatever. So,
Yeah, those are. And I remember as a kid when I watched this, knowing that something was going to happen because the cutout for the voodoo doll was gone. The
right.
little, because you remember as a kid where you could cut out the little coupons and
Yep.
fill them out and send them
It
away
was
for
the best
stuff.
part of the comic were the ads.
Yep.
You see what cartoons were coming out. You got to see all the weird stuff you could order.
Yep.
A lot of fun things with that. Now,
Self-addressed stamped envelope.
yeah, the so I mean, this is just the beginning. We open up with a pretty big name in horror with Stan, but I was amazed at how beginning to end, the cast is just, I mean, it's a good mix of young and old, but it's all big name actors.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know how they went about casting this. I mean, it makes you wonder in 80, 82, were all these people dying to be in a horror film? Was it Romero that's the draw? Was it the writing? It's amazing they were able to capture all the different people. Or maybe it's possibly that they were getting to do anthology film and it was just pieces. And so then you're just looking at, okay, well, I only have to be there for a week or 2 weeks. I'm going to get paid. And maybe
Yeah.
that's the draw to it. I don't know. But it's amazing how good the cast is.
Hmm.
And I guess maybe this is another case where we're so far removed that we know the cast is great. And maybe some of these people aren't big
Yeah.
names, but I mean,
Yeah.
there's Ed
Ed
Harris,
Harris. Yep.
and I'm sure now this most of these people I don't recognize, but I'm sure
Yeah.
they're somebody's. But Ed Harris is pretty big, and
Let's see. Let's look at the cast. Let's see who did if we have Hank Blaine. That
and I will
was
say this first story has a dance sequence that rivals Friday the 13th Part 3.
yes.
And so
Yes.
we needed that music from we needed both the music, the music he actually danced to and the music
Yeah.
that they put over it because they didn't have the rights to the other stuff. But I immediately started thinking, okay, this is a mirror image of the nonsense we had to watch in Friday the 13th.
Okay, so Aunt Bedelia is Vivica Lindfors, which makes sense because she's Swedish American, not because I was like, she has an accent. She
Mhm.
was in a movie that absolutely freaking terrified me as a child. The Hand.
Oh yeah, the Michael Caine movie.
Yes,
Yes.
she was in
Yeah.
The Hand.
I mean, how many times did you put your hand outside the car and immediately pull it back in because of that movie?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
That
Yep.
was
So
a
the
mainstay on the Saturday USA
yeah,
channel horror marathons. The Hand. Yeah, it's a fun movie.
yeah. So yeah, Crazy Aunt Bedelia. I'm kind of confused about. I know this is the aunt and these are her niece and nephew, but like, where's the rest of the family? Because the whole story behind this is they get together on Father's Day to remember Bedelia's father, whom she apparently or supposedly killed. But I'm like, where are these people's parents? Like, these are both their aunts. So where's the,
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Because you almost kind of think that's her mom,
yeah.
not the aunt, but it doesn't really.
Which I mean, that's just like, look into it. Um,
Yeah, I don't know.
but
Yeah,
yeah, my
they're
favorite
both the aunts,
sequence,
so I don't know.
yeah,
You're right. I don't know.
yeah, my favorite sequence of this one is where Bedelia's driving in that old
Yeah,
car and she's
yeah.
just ripping up the road. She's just crazy.
I got a cheat sheet, so
Oh, nice.
it's all every skit is done as a
Oh,
comic
wow.
book. So it's missing the ads and stuff that you have in the actual artwork that the guy did, but it is all 5 stories, minus it doesn't have the parents, and the kid and the dad story, but it has
Yeah,
the 5 stories. So I was flipping through it real quick to see if maybe it says something, but I don't see anything.
yeah,
But it's a
yeah.
solid start to the anthology. We get
Hmm.
old money, we get the crazy people. Ed Harris, I assume, is just dating that girl.
They're married. That's her
They're married.
husband.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I
And
mean that he's brought in, he's new to the family. He doesn't this isn't
yeah,
he's not I don't it felt like this was the first time he'd been there for this gathering.
yeah. And the I like the brother, he's like, I
Yeah.
don't like your husband.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know
Typical
why,
rich
like,
person.
yeah, they're like, they send because Bedelia, when she gets to the house, she goes to the graveyard and they send poor Ed Harris out to go get her to bring her in because they can't eat dinner until Aunt Bedelia gets to the table. And I'm like, nah. And the way he dies, that's just like you're thinking you've got time to move, but he did not.
Yeah, he definitely laid there the whole time and watched the gravestone shift
Yeah,
towards him, and there was multiple times he could have gotten up. I guess they're saying because of the drinking that they're a little slower to
yeah,
react, or he's just surprised because the grave's empty. But that's a good little zombie kind of
yeah. Because then this is the
smart
end.
zombie. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
the most iconic part of
yeah. So
that
the
story.
yeah, the dad he's out of the grave, and the other aunt, not Bedelia, he just like rips her head off.
Yeah,
Like he just rips her head off, throws it on there, puts some whipped cream and puts some candles, and the most iconic line is, "Where's my cake, Bedelia?"
yeah, for the whole thing, just screaming it at her, and then now he's got his cake,
Yeah,
and then the family kind of freaks out. And I love the comic book um, aesthetic when they do some of the action shots or the
yeah,
ending things. Like you said,
mm,
they morph into the actual illustrations, but before they do that, you get these really cool color combinations and camera angles, and then occasionally there's frames, and it's I think it's a fun way to kind of keep it. It kind of allows you to remember that it's stuff you don't have to take 100% serious, that it
yeah,
kind of gives you that release without
yep,
having to be funny the whole time. And then, because, a lot of times you get a good horror movie, you'll get some comic breaks just to give you that breather. But this one does it stylistically sometimes,
hmm
although it is funny throughout the whole thing. There's a lot of funny moments. So
yeah. And then we got the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill. This was just
it's,
kind of sad.
it really is a sad. And it feels like almost like he's poking fun at country folk in
Oh
a
yeah, for
way.
sure.
And but it's done in a way where you kind of you're more sympathetic. You feel more sympathy towards the character than you do wanting to join in on the pointing and laughing at the character.
Yeah.
Um, and the
He
situation, because it is really, it's one of those things where you kind of could see almost any person,
mhm.
having going through the same steps and stuff.
Yeah, and could you kind of see when we were talking about the color out of space, could you kind of see where I kind of like
Hmm. Oh, for sure.
thought of this just with the I'll call it moss because it's not really weeds. It looks more moss-like to me.
Oh yeah, yeah, I would say
Um,
Moss.
yeah. But I love what he's like, "Oh, you lunkhead."
Yeah, and he's in on the joke, the character himself. He kind of, I think, realizes that he doesn't um, match up to the top thinkers,
Yeah.
but he also has these big dreams. Thinking he's going to take the meteor
Get
and make a bunch of
$5,000
money.
for it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
even funnier too.
Taking it
He's
to the
he's
meteor department of the college.
yeah, and he's aiming low too. For
Yeah.
money wise, you would think nowadays it'd be like $1 million. You're dreaming here, and he's just
Yeah.
thinking of $1,000.
Yeah.
Um, but he of course he touches it, it's hot, burns his fingers, and then he pours water on it, which we all know not to do. But he didn't, so it cracks in half, and that's when he calls himself an idiot. And then he imagines him said, then what did he say, $5, a dollar, or something like that?
Yeah.
Like he wasn't gonna get anything for it. And then he starts having this weird growth on his body. But
Yeah.
again, he imagines the doctor visit and it talks himself out of going, which
Yep.
is,
Yeah, because he picks up the phone and he does the whole like, oh, we're gonna have to amputate because he ended up with blisters on his fingers and he was
yeah.
like sucking on his fingers. And he's like, oh no, oh no.
I don't
Um,
know. Did I get 3 shots for I don't know
I
if I
don't
got the last shot or not. I think
know.
it was funny how many um pictures were highlighted on IMDb where I normally get everything and what wasn't there. For some reason, I thought I went and found the picture of him completely covered, but I think I just watched, I just rewatched the thing. So
Yeah.
at one point, he's 100% covered in this green stuff, and he's given up on life, and he blows his brains out or whatever.
Yeah. Poor Jordy. And this one was like this was more less horror, I think, than the rest of them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was more of a well, almost a I don't want to say a morality tale, but it was kind of like what not to do if you come across a meteor, and that was about it. But it was, yeah, it was just really almost comic relief. It's probably why I'd say it's the weakest of the five, but it was still a good,
Yeah,
still
it
well
was.
done, well performed for King,
Hmm.
who's not an actor, and um,
Yeah, he did really well for someone who's not an actor. Like we all are used to him having like cameos in his
mhm.
movies and stuff. But he had like a full part. Um, and he did really good. And it was funny because you could almost think that he actually talks like that.
Yeah, yeah, you could definitely see that he he was basing it on something, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he did
something
really well.
familiar. He was basing it
Hmm.
on something familiar, not just making fun of whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I would say story two, like I said, weakest, but it's only because it's sandwiched between two really amazing things.
Yeah.
Because I think something that tied you over, that one it's so good because I think Leslie Nielsen is so such a villain in it
Yeah.
that it's out of character for us as we go backwards. But he started off in serious movies and TV shows, so I think people are probably used to seeing him just straight up act normal. But every time I see him, all I can think about are all the Naked Guns and
Mhm.
the Spy movie and
Yeah.
and all the things he did tongue in cheek,
Yeah.
Airplane.
Airplane.
Um,
Yeah.
so that when you see him play this character, he's just cold blooded and
Yeah. He's like
and angry
sociopathic. He's
and
like,
yeah, very
yeah.
angry.
Yeah.
And he's everything is played with such it's like a master class on the character he is, the scorned, you know,
Hmm.
um, husband or whatever.
Who
And
played who played Becky?
I didn't look it up. I don't
Galen
know.
Ross. Galen Ross, which is not anybody. Let's see, what was she in? Um,
I'm
she was
like,
in Dawn of the Dead from 78.
okay, so that makes sense
Yeah.
because some of these actors are people that were in Romero pictures. Like if so, we go back to the first movie or the first chapter with Ed Harris. Ed Harris was just coming off Night Riders, which
Mhm.
was the movie that Romero did where he has all these people on motorcycles reliving Camelot, and it's basically King Arthur, but it's set in the 70s with people on motorcycles. And so that's where he pulled Ed Harris. She comes from Night of the Living Dead. I bet you every one of these has characters or actors that he's used before.
Yeah. Yeah. But and then you got Ted Danson.
Which in an early role, I'm sure, but Ted Danson's really good in this, and he's
Hmm.
not. Um, Nowadays, you think of Ted Danson, he's always in comedies. You got Cheers, and you got um, The Good
Airplane.
Place,
Yeah.
and just think of all the shows where he's been had iconic characters that have been over multiple seasons, where you think of him as a comedian.
Yeah.
And there were movies in the 80s and 90s that he during the height of Ted Danson, which wasn't I don't think very long, but he did have a couple shots. But in this one, he comes across as it's almost a theater stage actor. Very well done too. His reaction, the two reaction between Richard and Harry, the characters, um, Richard being the husband that's being cheated on, and Harry the guy that's cheating with his wife. It's a very good back and forth.
Mm.
And you can kind of see the different elements of how they're both reacting to Becky's predicament.
Yep. And then, of course, the tide comes in
Yeah,
And
so they bury him up to his neck at gunpoint, and then the best part of this is watching how they do TV. He brings the truck out with a bazillion miles of cord so he can plug in the television, plug in the
where
VCR.
was this house that he was plugged into? Like,
Yeah, it was.
was it?
Oh, I guess it had to be just down the thing. He said he owned the whole beach, so he must have just been over the thing. But um, and then earlier than that, he when he's going over the guy's TV and VCR, he's like, "Oh, your connections are loose." And he was definitely like an AV guy,
Hmm.
and I thought that was kind of funny. And I know they were doing that to set it up so we'd understand that he would have the capability to do all the stuff he was doing, and to show us that it wasn't weird that he had all the cameras, because
Yeah.
in '82 that was weird to have that much stuff, especially out at the beach house or whatever. So I just thought it was kind of cool how advanced this story is when you think about things in the '80s, and also shows you how rich and powerful Richard probably was.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then therefore it also gives us a reason why he said earlier, what's mine is mine and I won't let it go. And you
Hmm.
could kind of see he's got this ego that's overpowering, where he'd rather kill his wife and kill this other guy than to allow them to continue to have their affair, or to let her go because
To
that's
let
all she
her
wanted.
was a divorce. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was like egotistical right up to the end because he's like the last line is I can hold my breath a long,
Yeah.
long time. Um, the scariest part about this segment for me was the way the zombie Becky and Harry talked
Yeah. We had that
because
watery, gurgly.
watery,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm like, oh
It
no,
was
no,
well
no.
done. And I wonder how long it took him in the makeup, because
Yeah,
it was pretty intricate makeup too. And I bet you that was a pain in the butt. The other thing I
and
was wondering the whole time is because, as we know later on in life, Ted Danson loses his hair and then everything he does is in a wig. His hair is magnificent in this. It's
mhm,
so thick and full and stuff. And I
yeah,
kept thinking,
yeah,
is he already wearing a wig? And I was
yeah,
waiting for the water to wash it off. And I was like, man, they really got it going. So I was like, it's just funny because, at the time when you watch it when you're younger, you don't know anything about that.
yeah, yeah. I got to give props to Harry though because he was even buried up to his neck with the tie coming in. He was still kind of calm, cool, and collected. He was
Yeah.
still he
He
had his head
he
on.
hadn't yeah, he hadn't put it all together that this guy was going to let him die. He thought he was just being terrorized.
Scaring him. Yeah,
Yeah.
terrorizing him. Yeah,
And then I don't think he realized. Okay, so then the one thing, and they cover it up with his I guess inner monologue, Richards. But when they come back and the bodies are gone, but the TV's still there, and he's like, "Oh, well, the bodies must have been washed away, but the
yeah,
TV, which wasn't in buried at all, it somehow didn't." I guess you could have thought the heads were washed away, popped off the bodies, but that was one thing. But then he kept saying it over and over again so that we realize, or we're pulled into his belief that, okay, he's trying to make an excuse, or he's trying to justify why the body's gone. So at
yeah,
least we know that they understand that is a hole in the story.
yeah. And another thing, and I know this is just being nitpicky, but as I'm watching it the other day, I'm like, you totally could just dig yourself out.
Well, I don't know. That's what he was trying to say, that once he was in there, it was like concrete, and that he couldn't get himself out because his arms, I guess, were down by his
You
waist
just
or
could
something.
start wiggling your fingers.
You would think, but I guess that was the point, because he goes out of his way to set that up too.
Yeah,
That once he was buried, he wouldn't be able to move because of, the properties of the sand and the location and all that.
yeah,
Although the hole didn't seem near deep enough, I guess, until he got into it. So, but yeah,
yeah.
no, we again, nitpicking, still great story, well
Yeah,
done,
it's
and
definitely a
it's
good
always
story.
fun, and
And
it's
it's not
amazing.
something I thought about as a child watching this. I
Oh
didn't
yeah,
think,
for
oh, he
sure.
could just dig himself out. I was like, oh my God, this guy is buried. Like, what's gonna happen?
Yeah, and um, you know, Nielsen looks great.
Yeah. Nielsen always looks great.
I know. Yeah, he always does. It's like he doesn't age. It's like he hit a point and then boom, that's it.
Yep.
He kept getting older, but he didn't show any of it. He must have sold his soul or something. So
Yeah. I don't know. And this is my favorite one, the crate.
Yes. I think in it is it it's the monster, right? The monster is just
Yeah.
so amazing and the Wilma's such a she's the worst monster of all
Yeah,
that you're kind
she's
of
just
happy.
like, yeah, she's like the worst person ever.
4 years ago I made the crate for the yard and had a thing in there like a werewolf slash ape man kind of thing that you could just see the top of his head because the crate opened just a little bit.
Wow.
But it was made out of wood and it only lasted a year. But I've got ideas to bring it back with some foam designs that I've been playing around with. But because it's such an iconic character,
Oh
such
yeah.
a fun movie, and this is I think the one that everybody, if it's not this, it's the next one that everybody kind of
Remembers.
gravitates to and
Yeah.
always brings up. If you bring up this movie, you're going to talk the crate or the next one
Yeah.
first and then talk the other three.
Yeah.
Um, I also think that the casting is amazing. All these are big actors from the 80s
Yep.
and late 70s or whatever, but all of them had big parts in our childhood, playing in multiple movies that I'm sure we both watched. Wilma, and of course I'm not going to remember her name off the top of my head, but she was in
Adrian
uh,
Barbeau. Yeah.
yeah, she was in Swamp Thing,
Hmm.
and I watched that because that was on the movie channels constantly,
I
and
watched
then
it all the time too. Yeah.
and Henry was in Fletch Lives, and in a ton of dramatic pieces. Always anything that was government or police based, he seemed to pop up as if not a a minor character, or at least some part that was maybe not the main character, but he was always around. Um, I can't remember his name either off the top of my head, but he was in a lot of TV shows too. And Dexter just has that. I'm sure the guy who played Dexter was in a bunch of movies in the 70s.
Yeah. Let's see. Where's Dexter? Who played
He's got that
Dexter?
swarmy kind of
Hmm.
um, British horror vibe to him. Just the
I
way
don't,
he kind of stands and delivers everything and stuff. But
I don't see him on the.
I think I
Oh,
do expand it.
I don't see Dexter
It's on the.
on the cast list.
Hmm. Oh,
Oh
Hal
no, there he
Holbrook.
is. Fritz Weaver.
Yeah. Okay. So
Fritz.
this is I'm looking at the collector thing, and it's got Hal Holbrook, which is Henry,
Yep.
and then Adriana Barbeau, which is Wilma, and then Fritz Weaver is the next person listed. So the top three names on the poster thing are these three. So they must have
Yeah.
been pretty big. He must have been
Yeah.
pretty big.
He was in the Crucible in '67.
Okay.
Um, Jaws of Satan in '81. Demon
All right.
Seed.
See, he just and that's probably what I'm thinking of, those kind of movies.
Yep.
Because those were all real popular when we were watching the marathons on the cable channels. Um, and I would always, if
The
you like
Legend
this
of Lizzie
movie,
Borden. He was in The Legend of Lizzie Borden in '75.
if you do like these, if you love this movie, I would recommend getting the Scream um, directors or the collector's edition. It comes with a book and it's got a whole bunch of special features. And of course, they've updated they've cleaned up the picture and stuff. So it's
Yeah.
definitely worth the extra bucks.
Yeah. So Adrienne Barbeau, I know her um for two movies, Creepshow and Swamp Thing. I could really not off the top of my head name anything else that she was in. But they're two completely opposite different characters. Like
Yeah.
in the way they act, they are. Wilma is just a garbage human being drinking whiskey and milk. Um, Ew, that's horrifying enough. And then in Swamp Thing, she's like this nice person who's
Yeah.
a scientist. And so it's funny
She's
how I could think of her in both of those movies, and they're completely opposite type of characters.
and she was in a whole bunch of other movies too that
Yeah.
I'm sure we know. When we sit down and look at the list and be
Escape
like, oh
from New
yeah,
York,
yeah,
Cannonball Run, she was in The Fog.
yeah, those are
Um,
all classics. She was
Yeah.
a Carpenter mainstay, at least
Oh
early.
my gosh, I didn't realize she was in Cannibal Women on the Moon.
Well, there you
Oh,
go.
Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death.
You
That
got to
was
start somewhere.
yeah.
But this is a fun one because I think it's because it's a classic tale. You get the box with the monster in it, shipped to the museum. What monster gets out of the box, starts killing people.
Yep.
But the twist is Henry decides to introduce his wife to the box
Yeah.
and then let that go too. So
Because
after,
throughout the whole thing, he's having these, I'll call them daydreams of killing his wife. There's one
yeah,
where they're at the party and she's just being awful and he shoots her in the middle of the crowd and everybody starts cheering.
yeah, that's the funny part is the way everybody reacts to when he kills her, the
Yeah.
clapping and celebrating. So it just
And
tells you
then
how bad a
she
human she
is.
is.
Yeah. And then there was the one where he was strangling her.
Yeah.
Um, and I was not sad. I was kind of like when he's like, she goes into where the box is under the stairs and the monster doesn't come out and he's like banging her against the crate trying to get the thing to wake up. But it's not even in the crate. We find out it's like in the corner. Um, but yeah, I was not sad when Wilma got it.
And the special effects on this one's really good too. It's violent and gross and really cool. The slashing and the attacking and biting and all that stuff. A lot of
Lots of
blood.
blood. Lots of
And
blood.
so that's always fun.
Yeah.
This one actually is one of those where the way I remembered it is the way it was.
Hmm.
Sometimes like you'll remember these old slashers from the early 80s and you're like, all these terrible things happen and it's all stuff you build up in your head. You go
Yeah.
back and watch it and it's like, oh, this should be PG today. There's nothing
Hmm.
going on here.
Yeah.
So
That one would definitely, that was pretty violent. This one is the worst one
yeah, this is my least favorite because of
of
the monster.
the monster is the roaches. And not just like regular roaches. Like when things start getting going, you've got like the giant hissing cockroaches and
Yeah.
all of them.
And I totally get. I mean, this is a Howard Hughes guy. He's a germaphobe, rich man, lives up at the top thing. He's paid all this money to make sure there was no
Germs and
germs or bugs
bugs.
or anything unclean. And he lives by himself. He's got gloves on. And it's a tremendous performance
Yeah.
because it's just him
Yeah.
and all the stuff going through it. And he's just, and again, another big name actor. And my mom is terrified of bugs. And I think she's instilled that in me to a point, where I'm always on the lookout for him. Second you see one up, we're bombing the house and, you know, trying to keep up with it on the outside and all that. I do not like bugs anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't see the fun of going out and picking up bugs and all that. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not a big fan.
I don't
So,
mind bugs per se. It's roaches.
well, roaches for sure, but I'm just not
Yeah.
a big bug guy. But
Yeah.
yeah, and
Oh,
the problem
you
is growing up in the South, we have these giant water bugs, as we call them,
yeah.
and they get in everything.
Yeah, see, you and I probably would not have been friends as kids because I spent all my time outside collecting snails and roly-polies
Oh no,
and
I had a good collection of roly polies and caterpillars, and I did. So those are okay. But yeah, nowadays I'm definitely not looking
yeah.
to
Yeah, me
pick up
neither, no.
creepy
Yeah.
crawlies and stuff. But yeah, as a kid, but roaches for sure,
Yeah.
100% no.
Yeah.
Um, Terrifying.
Yeah, and he goes into that the worst part about the worst scene I hated because it was just so unsettling was when he was having a conversation with the maintenance man through the like looky hole and
Mhm.
like you could see the guy's mouth and like his eye and like they were just like over exaggerating their speech and everything. It just I don't know, it was just a very unsettling encounter between those two.
Yeah, it's really well done.
Yeah. And yeah,
And
so ew on the roaches.
and
And
it's
he
got one of the most iconic kills, I think, of horror, at least in the 80s. Um, but it's also one that's been replayed over and over again with different things. So that might be what hammers it home, but where we finally learn where all the roaches are.
yeah, they're
And
in his hermetically sealed room and
well, they're in his body coming out
yeah,
at the
yeah,
end.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they're in his body. Yeah.
Because
It's
after
just
we see
it's
the all of them on everything, and then they go to the scene where he's just on the ground and there's nothing anywhere, and everybody's kind of like, you kind of like, what's going on? And then they start
it's
pushing out through his body.
yeah. Yeah.
And so, a funny note, because I was watching some of the special feature stuff. Um, the lady that did she was brought on to help with the costumes and stuff, her and her husband, and they were doing the Stephen King stuff. And she said there were roaches everywhere. She goes, the Wranglers promised they'd get them all. She goes, but they didn't. And so for the rest of the shoot, they would come across just roaches everywhere on stuff. And so
Ew.
I thought that's hilarious too, because then that's just going to drive that home for the
Yeah.
people.
And then these like movie stars are bringing these roaches home with them.
She said this guy was really chill about it. Like they did not have a problem with because they put them all over his body and stuff. He
Ugh.
thought it was cool, played into it, loved it, and I think and you can really tell. You can
Yeah.
tell when an actor is like that. When they really get into the thing, and you have it's kind of like with Michael Keaton in Pacific Heights when he's trying to drive the people out that own the property, and he's sitting there and he's holding it, and the roaches are on his hands and stuff, and it's
Yeah.
just ugh. You could
Yeah.
CGI it today, but back then you just had to dump roaches on folks.
Yeah. I would you could not pay me enough to co-star with roaches.
Yeah, I'd have a problem. I mean, we'd have to see. We'd have to see. Would I be able to pay for the mental health,
Yeah.
hospital bill? If so, if I can cover that and still make some money, maybe. But yeah, I'm not a
Yeah.
fan. Not
Yeah.
a fan at all.
It brings me back to childhood living in base housing in Germany in those giant apartment buildings. And, there's hundreds of families living, and somebody's going to have roaches, and they just would bomb one stairwell, but the roaches would move to the next. And then they would bomb that one, and the roaches would move to the next. And then when they get to the end, the roaches have gone back to the first stairwell, and it's
Yeah.
just, I remember when we first went to Germany, when my dad was stationing kids again, we lived off base for a while until there was housing available on base, and then we moved. So we brought our birds and left them on the counter in the kitchen because we were going back. We were moving the next day, but we wanted to bring the birds over so we didn't have to worry about them. And I remember getting to the apartment the next day, and there were like dead roaches on the bottom of the bird cage. And I'm like, and ever since then, I've just like, I I see these bugs now on the outside of my house, and I'm like, is that a roach? No, roaches are not outside; they're inside, so it's totally not a roach.
Yeah, they're creepy. Well, like
Yeah,
I said, in the South we get the water bugs that are really big, exaggerated looking, and they're on everything. And so you got
yeah,
to constantly treat for that.
yeah. So,
Alabama was really bad, and we get them here too, um, seasonally, I guess. In fact, I
yeah,
get to the point now where I'm more grossed out by the smaller roaches than I am by the bigger ones because the smaller ones, to me, I think of them as more of the uh,
invasive, more invasive.
invasive, unclean, as they like to tell us.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we had a base housing kind of situation like that where um, we had to in Enterprise, not Enterprise, but Fort Rucker in Alabama. So we had to stay off base as they were getting, like you said, housing ready for us. And the place that they put us in or whatever, whoever had left it had basically left all their food behind and stuff. And so when you went
Uh,
in the house, it was just the first one was just covered. They had to move us to a different place and then totally fumigate that entire house. And I think I
yeah,
was in like second grade at that point. So
yeah. It's nasty. A friend of mine was telling me, in high school she went to Russia. Um, And she said in the place that they stayed, they didn't stay in a hotel. They stayed at like a youth hostel or something. And the roaches were so bad, you had to even wear flip-flops in the shower
wow, no,
because they were just like,
out.
oh, yeah. I'm like, you know what? I would have just left all my luggage in Russia. You
Yeah.
know, nope. Apparently, they were not afraid of the light.
Yeah, those are the ones that we worry about, the ones that don't
Yeah,
scatter when the lights come on.
yeah, yeah. This is a classic movie. It'll hold up. I mean, it holds up today.
Yeah.
From what I.
Special effects are amazing. Storytelling's really well. The acting is amazing. Really good casting. I mean, it's a reason why I think everybody loves Romero. It's not just that he basically gave us the zombie trope and but every time he does a horror movie, he does something that's groundbreaking and sticks with the audience.
Yeah.
So
And he has a great way of, picking the cast that's perfect, you know,
yeah, I
and
mean, I
even
could,
even taking somebody who's not an actor and making them a really good actor.
yeah, and I know that those two were really good friends during the 70s and 80s, so maybe that's part of it, you know. But um, he definitely did a good job. Stephen King did, and maybe it's because of the direction he got, you know. But yeah,
Yeah.
Romero's really good. So, and every time he goes back to the horror stuff, every time he tried to take a step outside of horror and do something different, if it didn't work, he'd come back and he'd give us something amazing. So,
Yeah. Now, do you know, was it Romero's idea and he had Stephen King write, or was it Stephen King's idea? And
you know, I think I used to know the answer, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure Stephen King came up with it, but I don't know. We'll have to look.
yeah, because I was always under the impression that this was like a book that Stephen King had written, but it's not.
No,
It's just strictly a movie script.
I
Um,
think he was paid to write a script, and this is what he came up with. And he was friends with Romero, but I don't know 100% the whole backstory of that part. So we'll have to look it up and see. Maybe we'll talk about it on the next episode before we get going to the whatever it is we're doing next.
yeah. All right. Well, if you haven't seen Creepshow, I don't know what you're waiting for. You definitely want to watch it. Um, it's a
Yeah, and
great,
there's two or three. There's three movies, and there's a whole TV show. It's got what, four seasons, and
yeah. Um, I don't think I've seen Creepshow 2 and 3. Maybe I've seen 2, but I definitely don't think I've seen
you
3.
haven't seen two. Sure, you haven't seen two. Let's
I
see.
maybe have.
Let's see if they
I
have the cover on the inside. That's the
yeah, it
one thing
doesn't.
with these. They're always you got the new cover and then you got the old cover on the inside. Let's see if I got it. Oh, well, that doesn't really help, does it?
Yeah, well, I remember that image. I just
And
I
if you
couldn't
remember in
name.
anything, the
Yeah.
raft, the the kids drive to the lake,
Okay, and there's the like
the black
sludge
oily stuff,
sludge. Okay, yep. So I have seen it.
and then the dime store Indian.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Creepshow 2 I mean, it came out like almost immediately. Well, maybe 86, so 4 years later. But I mean, it was right in our wheelhouse for when we were probably really getting hardcore into
Yeah.
horror and stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
now that you say that, I remember the raft. I remember.
so so definitely kick. Now I know I haven't seen three because I saw it was on Amazon for as Prime, so you can see it now for free if you have Prime. So I'm going to sit down and watch three and see if it's any good. I
Yeah.
don't think Romero's part of it. Although to be honest with you, I don't think Romero was part of this one. Yeah, this one's directed by a different guy, Michael Gornick.
Was it
But
still written
it's
by King?
a screenplay by Romero based on stories by King.
Oh,
So it's still
okay.
got those two guys leaning into it, but and they probably were producers too, because that's how they
Yeah.
do that stuff. But so three's probably, it might be somebody we know as, big on some other kind of movie projects, but
Yeah.
probably not those guys.
And now that I'm remembering those two segments, I want to watch two now and remember about it. And
Yeah, I'm
then
curious to see
I'll
what
watch
three.
three.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what three is like because I don't. It must have come out during a time when I have a dark period when I stopped watching a bunch of the stuff as it was coming out, either because it may have been straight to video or it may have been, streaming stuff, and I don't always stream stuff. So,
Yeah.
and now I'm always like 5 years behind everything. So, because
Yeah.
I'm too busy watching the old ones that we grew up on because those are the ones that I enjoy. So,
And you know they're good.
yeah, it's always rare if I watch something that comes out. I definitely won't see it in the theater, but even when it comes straight to, Netflix or whatever, it's still rare for me to watch it within like 6 months or whatever. So the only one that I broke that on was Terrifier, which we've already done an episode on. So
Yeah.
I was immediately intrigued by art.
Yeah. He's great. He's a great character. Still got to watch two and three though.
Yeah, I haven't seen three yet. So, but two was two. I mean, it was good, but it was a little too long. I really
Yeah.
do feel like they could have cut 15, 20 minutes off and tightened it up a little bit. Uh, they really leaned into the gore of that one. So
All right, well, go check out Creepshow, and we will see you on the next episode.
take it easy.